I'm not going to shoot you between the eyes. I'm going to shoot you between the balls. Welcome back, John. So glad you could make it. Hello. Welcome back. Got me clipboard. Hold your breath. Make a wish. Count to 3. There he is. A little nonsense now and then is relished by the wisest men. How are we all? It's a bit grim out there today, boys. It's a bit grim on the old weather front. But the heat wave that tried to kill my car's gone and the car's back on the road. So who had the last laugh there? How can you be? Yeah, anyway, we're away. We'll go back to Stivy at some point when the weather picks up. I think after these, I'm going to do a couple of chapters because they're not as long as the last ones. That's my windscreen wipers. Probably after chapters 5 and 6, which is what we're going to do today. Going to go back and do a little tour of Stivy. Do a little walkabout. Go and have a little walkabout around the old, around the village. Back in the village. So yeah. What happened so far? Well, where were we last time? Chapter 4 was in parts 1 and 2. Because it was so bloody long. Not really. Longish. Longer. Yeah, so Daisy was getting off the bus Thursday, wasn't it? We're back to Thursday, August 12th. She was getting off the bus, walking home, going down, going out on the piss later that night. Stumbles across Douglas hiding out down at the allotments. Hiding out and generally being a bit of a naughty boy. A bit of a little shit. So we're going to pick up sort of where we left off. Where are we now? Chapter 5. We're going to go and see what Reverend Bowen's up to. Let's have 2's on that. 2's on that tea, bruv. You know what saves to do. Reverend Bowen's going for a little walk down to the butcher's. She might be passing by some Morris dancers in their natural habitat. So why don't we just dive straight in? Down with it. Chapter 5. Blimey, Reverend, it's a bit warm for all that, isn't it? Terence Russell called over the dark green flat top of his perfectly manicured hedge. Reverend Bowen, along with Moses, her black and caramel King Charles Spaniel, were passing the Morris man's bungalow on Castle Street en route to the butcher's. Bowen, deep in thought, was in no mood for conversation, but the jovial Morris man was not going to let her pass without a fight, it seemed. "Good afternoon, Terence," she said, a little startled to see that the Morris man was topless. She scanned his sizable, well-kept garden. "Gentlemen," she said with a crumpled brow, noting the assorted gaggle of fatigued dancers strewn around the garden like battle-weary soldiers, many of which were also topless. Colin Blunsdon was reclining on a deck chair, for once silent and inanimate. His shirt was fully unbuttoned, exposing his prodigious beer gut. A damp pink towel hung over his face and chest, making him look as if he was waiting to be worked on by a rather camp mortician. There was a crescent of empty beer cans scattered around his feet. Bob Dobson leant forward on a white plastic chair, his straggly, greying black hair wet with perspiration. He was holding a can of lager and wearing a blank expression. The other members of the group were stretched out on the lawn, most with cans in their hands. Among them, an accordion lay discarded on the ground next to its case. A collection of white hankies, colourful ribbons and bells were strewn about the lawn, and florally decorated top hats sat on the lawn looking like stout black chimneys growing out of the flat green ground. "Me and the boys are just taking a little breather, Hilda. Hard work in this heat, see? That's why I let 'em take the old tops off. It's meant to be a full dress rehearsal ready for Sunday, but I said, boys, you can take your shirts off, but the baldricks is staying on, he said, with a smile and a dictatorial finger pointing skywards. Terence Russell, although topless, indeed still wore the green and yellow baldricks of his Morris Man uniform, the colourful X crisscrossing his upper body like gaudy bondage gear. His impressive tan glowed beneath it, and he held his top hat under his arm. Reverend Bowen was a little taken back by it all, as if she had somehow stumbled upon some strange kind of rural S&M club, where leather, whips and chains were replaced by hankies, ribbons and bells. Terence, however, appeared completely at ease with how he looked. I can't believe you can walk around in all that black on a day like today, Reverend. You must be boiling, especially with that waistcoat on and all. You want to get some of this gear on, he said, proudly pointing at himself before realising and changing the direction in which he pointed. Well, some of that gear on, he said, now cocking a thumb to the pile of white shirts on the lawn. Don't worry, he said, that'll all be in the wash tonight, ready for the weekend, before adding, run it, boys! Russell received a round of non-committal groans from his weary troops. I always washes the kit before the big shows, Terence said proudly. Too good to you and I, boys! More mumbling sounds came from his men. Yes, well, very nice, Terence, Bowen said, still a little bemused by it all. But as a matter of fact, I rather like black, she said, although I must say I am beginning to regret coming out in the waistcoat as well, she said, rolling her shoulders under the black leather waistcoat of her Crossroads Christian Motorcycle Club uniform, hanging heavily on her shoulders, a bit like all her other concerns at the moment. Her imminent eviction from the vicarage was second only to the wanton act of vandalism committed against her stained glass window. She wore the waistcoat because to her it represented freedom, freedom from her worldly cares. When she was out on her trike, she felt like she could outrun anything, and after her supper with the bishop later, that is exactly what she intended to do. Hey, give us a look at that a minute, Reverend, Terence Russell said, noticing the embroidery on the reverse of Bowen's waistcoat. Come on, Reverend, he said, don't be shy, give us a twirl. Bowen wearily did as she was asked, showing the Morris Man the crucifix design that was the club's logo on the rear of the waistcoat. Hey, now that's clever, he said. Well, look at that, Crossroads, he said. Hey, Jerry, come over here and look at this, Russell said. Another topless, middle-aged man walked over to join them. What's that then, Chief? He said enthusiastically. What's that then, Chief? Came the muffled, mocking voice of Colin Blunsdon from under the pink tea towel. Heyman, topless but still wearing his baldricks and also his top hat, rested an elbow on his lead dancer's shoulder. Look at that, Terence continued, marvelling at the emblem's design. A crucifix. Look, Jerry, you got C-R-O-S-S going along there, Russell said, tracing his finger across the horizontal, and then R-O-A-D-S coming down there, now tracing the vertical word. And the O in the middle works for both of them. Well, I never. Now that is clever, he said, smiling and wiping his brow. That is clever, Chief, Heyman agreed. Very clever. And what does that say across the bottom there, Hilda? Thy will be done. Hey, now, what about that, he said. You see it, Jerry? Wheel, he said, looking amazed at his friend. Like thy will be done from the Lord's Prayer, but it says wheel instead because they're into their motorbikes. Very clever, Chief. Very clever indeed. Oh, stop calling him Chief, you twat, came the voice from beneath the towel again. Moses at Bowen's feet began to whimper. Terence looked down sympathetically at the King Charles Spaniel. And look at little Moses' collar there, he said. Look, it's just like yours, Reverend. Got the little white bit on the front and everything. Isn't that neat, Jerry? Very neat, that, Chief, Heyman agreed. Reverend Bowen was beginning to feel like an unwitting fashion model and was becoming increasingly bored with the scrutiny afforded to her, and now to her dog also, by the topless Morris dancers, and the heat wasn't helping. She attempted to extricate herself from proceedings. Yes, all very good indeed, she said, as patiently as she could muster. Now, if you gentlemen will excuse me, I must get to the butcher's before they close. I've got the bishop round for supper tonight, and I'm sure you gents will want to continue with your preparations for the big day. Oh, absolutely, Reverend, Terence said. My boys are raring to go, aren't you, boys? A faint murmur of half-hearted affirmation came from over Terence's shoulder, and his smile dropped slightly. He lowered his voice, leaning in towards Reverend Bowen. Bad business about your window, Reverend, Terence said gloomily. They got who done it yet? Put a few through, so I hear. The police are looking into it, she said. What, the hole? Came the muffled voice again as Colin Blunsdon began to crow with laughter under the towel at his own joke. Shut up, you, Terence said over his shoulder. Well, you go and get on your way, Reverend. Don't let us stop you. You go and have a nice evening with that bishop of yours. Indeed, she said, and good luck with your preparations. I look forward to seeing it all come together on Saturday, she lied. She turned and continued on her way, Moses by her side, panting in the heat, stroking the dog's small head and soft floppy ears. She said, Shall we go and see Eric then? The dog immediately perked up, seemingly aware of the destination and the potential rewards of such a journey. Right, come on, you lazy bunch of sods, on your feet, she heard Terence say to his gang of not-so-merry men as she put distance between herself and the dancers. She continued down Castle Street, rounding the corner onto Stocks Lane and towards the railway. She was just about to thank the Lord for the level crossing's barriers being up when the shrill sound of the warning alarm sounded, and so instead she quietly cursed him. She contemplated turning round and making for the farm track that led up to the top end of the high street, but weariness overpowered her, and so she waited at the barriers. She turned to Moses, who was beginning to appear somewhat distracted, and emitted an audible whine. Patience is a virtue, apparently, isn't it, boy? She said, but the dog was not looking at her. Instead, Moses' attention was focused towards the wall on the other side of the road. The dog began pulling at the lead, whining further. Reverend Bowen compliantly walked with the dog towards the wall that bordered the allotment, and was aghast at the sight of destruction as she overlooked it. She gasped, held her breath and expelled. What the hell is going on around here? She said. The image of the smashed stained glass window and the photocopied backside came to mind. Her blood began to boil as the image of Douglas Blouse's smirking face formed in her mind, grinning with pleasure at his loathsome achievements. And he had done this to the allotments also. She was almost certain of it. Moses, still whining, began scratching against the wall, as if in a futile attempt to climb it. Reverend Bowen could sense that something had spooked him. She heard what sounded like voices emanating from one of the sheds at the far end, and immediately knew that her instincts were correct. He was here. The hiss of the rails, signalling the arrival of the train, discordantly harmonized with Moses' whinings. The train came into view, thundering past the vicar, who continued to look distractedly over the wall at the damage. The train passed and the barriers lifted, but Reverend Bowen did not cross. Instead, she turned and made her way back towards the small gate that led into the allotments, spurred on by the sound of the voices coming from the ramshackled shed that were becoming louder and louder the closer she got. Bowen could see a key jammed into a discarded padlock a couple of feet from the shed. She picked it up. On it was the name Blunsdon. For a brief moment she actually felt mild amusement. The old drunkard lying under the pink towel laughing at her window. Just one of many villagers who had strayed from her congregation. In Blunsdon's case, choosing to worship at the alcoholic altar of the Crafty Digit public house. She heard banging and muffled voices. Reverend Bowen knew he was in there. Her pulse quickened with the sudden rush of adrenaline that coursed through her. The sound of something thumping against a flimsy shed wall startled Moses, who began scratching against its closed door, barking incessantly. Bowen harnessed her adrenaline. "All right, come out of there," she called to the shed's unseen occupants, her heart beating loudly in her chest. Moses was still scratching wildly at the door. She banged on the door, unsure whether to open it, worried about what she might find. "I said come out!" Before she could finish the sentence, the shed door flew open, hitting the dog full in the face. "Moses!" she cried. Douglas emerged from the shed, squinting, staggering into the daylight, dazed and uttering a strange, nervous laugh. He stumbled, taking in his surroundings and the new company. His head recoiled slightly at the sight of Reverend Bowen, and his strange, panting laugh dissipated. morphing into a low growl. A crumpled sneer formed on his lips as he backed away from the startled vicar. He looked down at the whimpering dog, laying dazed amongst the broken remains of a smiling garden gnome, looking contemptuously at the stunned animal and uttering a childish titter of laughter. Bowen stood, looking on, shocked. He barged past the vicar, making a run towards the farm track and away from the allotment. The shove that nearly knocked her to the ground startled Bowen from her momentary immobility, and she finally regained her senses. As the shock alleviated and reality crept back in, she called after him. "You smashed my window, didn't you, you little sod? And you're going to pay. As God is my witness, you're going to bloody well pay." She watched Douglas make his escape. The sound of his manic, tittering laughter faded as he ran. Rage consumed her. She turned her attention to Moses, who was unsteadily getting back to his feet, sidling up needfully to the vicar. She stroked the dog, soothing him, noticing the trickle of blood coming from his little black nose. "Bastard," she said, watching Douglas flee. The shed door creaked open on its rusty hinges, and Reverend Bowen's nose wrinkled as the smell of stale alcohol and mouldy food wafted up her nostrils. She heard a shuffling sound coming from inside the shed, whose interior was now partially lit by the sagging open door. Daisy Carr emerged, an open pair of garden shears dangling from one hand. She didn't appear to be hurt, but she was breathing heavily. She dropped the shears onto the shed's rotten wood floor. They landed with a dull thud. Reverend Bowen looked Daisy Carr up and down. The front of her white top was a dull yellowy brown. Her long blonde hair was streaked with sweat and cobwebs. Her chest was pitching up and down, but decreasing as her breathing slowed to a more regular pace. Out of the corner of her mouth she blew a straggly lock of hair from off her face. "Good Lord," Reverend Bowen said. There we go. Busted. Let's keep going. Chapter 6. Douglas made his escape up the farm track, heading towards the main road, stopping halfway up its moderate incline as tiredness overwhelmed him. Panting, he bent over, putting his hands on his knees, nearly throwing up as sour lager-tasting bile rose in his throat. He spat a ball of light brown saliva at the dusty track. Mercifully, the booze stayed down. "Fucking nosy cow," he swore breathlessly, cursing the vicar for blowing his chances. God, Daisy was sexy when she was angry, he thought, certain within his own deluded mind that had they not been so rudely interrupted by the snooping vicar, his attempts at a sexual conquest would have eventually led to success. He felt a confusing mixture of sexual arousal, still thinking about Daisy, and bitter resentment towards the vicar for ruining his chances, and he cursed both Bowen and her yappy dog. She was bound to grass on him. Daisy wouldn't, but that meddling gob-botherer would be straight down to tell the old Bill. Well, bollocks to her and the old Bill. He didn't care. He was sweating profusely, glad that he had made the alterations to his jeans. Christ, that shed was hot, he thought. But how sexy did Daisy look in that wet white top of hers after he'd opened that can of lager on her, like a victorious Formula One champion. He'd glimpsed the proud protrusion of her nipples beneath the damp white cotton of her top. 5 more minutes and he would have been in there for sure. Nosy, god-bothering cow, he thought, thinking he might have to pay her precious little church another visit. All he needed was more ammo, and there was plenty of that on offer, he thought, looking at all the ballast on the railway line. He stood up straight, feeling a little better at the prospect of revenge, and made his way over to a nearby blackberry bush, selecting 4 decent-looking candidates. He put them all in his mouth at the same time, and winced as he realised that at least 1, maybe 2, were still well underripe. Nevertheless, he swilled the berries into a liquid before punching himself in the face, swishing his head dramatically to one side as if he had just been landed a good one by Rocky Balboa, and spitting out the liquidised blackberries in a dark jet of fake gore. He heard a hiss. After so many years of living near the railway, his ears had become sensitive to its sounds, and he could detect that old familiar sound a mile away. He wasn't sure if he could make it down onto the line in time from where he was, but undeterred he wiped the residual dripping blackberry mess from his mouth with the back of his hand and darted towards the railway, easily bypassing the ineffective wire fence. He popped the button on his shorts as he ran. He'd scurried halfway down the railway embankment as the thunderous sound approached and the train came into view from the west. Knowing he would not make it to the track in time, he dropped his shorts on the embankment and lowered his boxers, turning his backside towards the railway line just as the intercity train hurtled past. He slapped his bare bum cheeks with both hands, reeling off a string of profanities as he did so, his words drowned out by the noise of the train. He hoped that whoever was on it got a good look. He nearly lost his footing, coming close to overbalancing. Alarmed, he leant forward, steadying himself as the train disappeared towards London and out of sight. He slumped down on the embankment, a feeling of partial release flowing over him. It wasn't quite the rush you felt when you had both feet firmly planted on the sleeper, but it was okay. It was better than nothing, and he felt the anger in him begin to subside. He rolled over, attempting to fasten his shorts, and was stung by a nettle. It was not entirely unpleasant. He masochistically rolled again and was stung many times on his exposed rear end, the pain providing a perverse kind of physical outlet for his frustrated mind. It felt good. Sometimes, even though it hurt, pain felt good. But not as good as getting even with that nosy god-botherer was going to feel. He lay on the railway bank a while, his mind slowly beginning to calm. The pain of the stinging nettles subsided to a soft buzz. He felt safe. He could not be seen from here, even if someone were to walk down the farm track. He dozed a while, ignoring the passing trains that hurtled by at staggered intervals, his compulsions temporarily doused by brooding thoughts of resentment and revenge. He nodded off, for how long he wasn't quite sure. When he woke a little while later, he got up, brushed himself down, ducked back through the fence, and walked up the farm track's short incline towards the main road. Upon reaching it, he turned left and headed back into the village. Brace yourself. Douglas is heading back into the village. That'll be a quiet night at the library. Not.